Hello everyone, how's it going? This is Kryz, and in this video we are going to replace the IsFull method in the ItemContainer interface with a CanAddItem method. Because as soon as we have stacking, it no longer makes sense to check if the inventory is full without the context of which item we are trying to add. While the inventory might be full for a particular item, because there's no longer any slots where it can be stacked, it might not be full for another different item. After replacing the method in the ItemContainer interface, let's go into the ItemContainer implementation and delete that method as well. And let's implement the CanAddItem method just above the addItem method. In this method, it's going to be very useful for us to know the exact amount of the item that we want to add beforehand. So let's add an amount input parameter and give it a default value of 1. Both here and in the interface. To check if we can add a certain amount of a specific item, we need to know if the item container has enough free spaces to accommodate that item. Those free spaces include empty slots, where we can add up to the maximum number of stacks of that item, and they also include other stacks that are not yet full. Every time we find an empty slot, or a slot with an item with the same ID, we'll determine the number of free spaces in that slot by subtracting the slot's amount to the item's maximum stacks. This method can return true if the number of free spaces is larger than or equal to the amount of items that we want to add, otherwise it will return false. Now that we have this method, we need to go into all of the places where we were using the IsFull method and replace it with this one. We can easily figure out where those places are by just opening up Unity, letting it compile, and going into all of the places that give an error. Let's start by the character script. This one is pretty straightforward. We just need to replace this with CanAddItem and pass the item reference. The other place where we were using this method is in the crafting recipe UI, on craft button click method. But here, I actually want to refactor this quite a bit. It shouldn't be the job of the UI to know if the inventory is full for it to craft the recipe. That should be included in the crafting recipe itself. So let's delete most of this code and keep only the call to the craft method. Inside the crafting recipe script, our craft method is already calling the canCraft method. That seems pretty sensible. But the canCraft method is only checking if the container has the materials for the recipe and is not checking if it is full. If we do that, that's going to mean that our canCraft method is going to start doing two separate things. So let's separate those out into different methods. We're going to need to check if the container has the materials, and we'll also need to check if the container has enough free space. The logic for this method is very similar to the hasMaterials method. We're going to loop through all of the results and check if we can add the specified amount of each item to the item container. As soon as we find one result that can't be added to the item container, we can immediately return false because we won't be able to complete the crafting. If we loop through all of the results and end up being able to add all of them, then we can return true and say that we are successful in adding all of the results to the inventory. Other than this, I would like to add the debug log statement that we had, so that we can know exactly why we were not able to craft a recipe if that's the case. To be honest, for a totally complete and robust implementation of this system, we would need to be able to return the error messages out of this method, so that we can then display them to the user, and we would be able to check if the inventory has space by taking into account the state of the inventory after the materials have already been removed, and we would also need to be able to check the state of the inventory after each result has been added to see if subsequent results can still also be added. But this is a topic for a whole different video. While we're at it, the craft method is also doing two separate things, so let's refactor this into separate methods. Here, we are removing the materials, and in a second for each loop, we are adding the results. As for this video, this is it. I know it's been a little bit short, sorry for that, but I hope it's still been useful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.